This was my first year ever of loving flowers. I've always thought flowers were real pretty, and I like looking at them and stuff, and it's better to have a world with flowers than without flowers. I suppose that's been my opinion. But I've never proactively made flowers happen until this year. We got a house, and it's fine. I mean, like nothing special or remarkable. It has an old deck on it that, again, is not special or remarkable. And I wanted to sit on the deck, and I wanted it to be pleasant, but it was just dull and drab back there. And then one day I was walking by the garden department at Lowe's, and I saw those flowers sitting there. It's like, oh my goodness, those are really cheap. Like, I have enough money to buy those flowers. And so I just bought little baskets of flowers, and I was like, I got to hang them somewhere. So I bought little hangers, and pretty soon I'd bought 4 of these little pine trees, like decorative ones like you see in Italy, and all of these different kinds of flowers that I totally don't know what they are or how they work. And I was like, I guess you got to put water on them and stuff. And so I started watering them, and I made a little fake fountain myself out of some potting plants and a couple of fish tank pumps. Then I made this little oasis on the back deck, and it was really fun. But I'm telling you, it's a sauna back there in the middle of summer, and you really do have to water these flowers or they just completely break. And one day it was really hot, and I'm hanging out there with some friends having a beverage, and I'm looking at this one plant that's sitting in the sun. I don't know what this plant is like. It's sort of rhubarby, but a flower. I'm doing a terrible job of explaining it, but like I said, I don't know what I'm talking about. And I hadn't watered this mysterious alien plant with these red stalks that day. And as the conversation went along, I just watched this thing completely flop over. Like, remember those toys that have the little button on the bottom? You push it and then the thing goes completely limp and it just dangles there. And you let go and it springs back up. Well, it didn't spring back up. It just went completely droopy and limp before my eyes. And I thought, well, I know one thing that's good for plants. It's water. So I put some more water on there and I thought, well, maybe in a few days that'll be better. And then I watched it come back to life. The water got sucked up into the other plant parts and it stood back up. And I was like, that's incredible. These things are amazing. Why have I not been doing this my entire life? Flowers are awesome. But the point is, I have seen what it looks like for something to wither and wilt and die really, really quickly. But it still took a few hours. In this passage that we're looking at in Matthew 21, there are people present who are much more familiar with the life of plants and botanical things than I am. And even so, they were stunned at how quickly, not just some little plant, but like a legitimate hardwood tree type plant just completely withered and wilted and fell apart before their eyes. I took too long to tell you about the thing. I could have just read you the passage. So I'm going to read you the passage now and make it up to you. It goes like this. Matthew 21, starting in verse 18. And this is on the road trip back from Bethany, which we talked about yesterday, to Jerusalem the day after clearing the temple and having a fight with the religious leaders. It goes like this. Early in the morning, as he, Jesus, was on his way back to the city, that's Jerusalem, he was hungry. Seeing a fig tree by the road, he went up to it, but found nothing on it except leaves. Then he said to it, "May you never bear fruit again." And immediately the tree withered. When the disciples saw this, they were amazed. "How did the fig tree wither so quickly?" they asked. Jesus replied, "I tell you the truth, if you have faith and don't doubt, not only can you do what was done to this fig tree, but also you can say to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea, and it will be done. If you believe, you'll receive whatever you ask for in prayer." Admittedly, there's a lot here. Let's just take it from the top. We already covered the geography stuff. We're traveling from Bethany back to Jerusalem. This tree's along the road and is common practice for people to glean what they needed to glean. We talked about that all the way back in Matthew, whatever it was. The first of the Sabbath controversy was when we're walking along the side of the road. At the beginning of 12, we talked about how you can glean. There were laws and allowances for picking food off the side of the road or going through a field or whatever. And so maybe, in defense of this poor tree, maybe a bunch of other people are there for festival week and they're on their way making this trip, or maybe people are always buzzing back and forth up and down this road if Bethany is some kind of convalescence village and they just grab food as they're coming and going to see their sick loved ones or whatever. Maybe this thing's been really, really picked over. It doesn't matter. Jesus, who knows all things and whose judgment is always correct, looks at the fig tree and is disgusted that it is not doing fig tree things. You had one job, fig tree, and that is have there be figs so that I can eat figs. And when there weren't figs, Jesus was like, well, then what is the actual point of view? There's no reason here. And he curses the thing, which feels like a bit of a surprise. The, I think, image that would probably pop to the mind for the original audience maybe would be Xerxes on his invasion of Greece in the, what would that have been, early 5th century BC, I guess. And so he goes and he tries to cross the Hellespont. That's the little stretch of water that divides the Black Sea from the Mediterranean Sea. Am I getting that right? I don't have a map in front of me. It's a little stretch of water right there that's very strategic and very important and can be very unruly. Well, Xerxes was trying to move a whole lot of people across that water, and the water didn't cooperate. He tried to build some stuff to make it so he could get across, and the water wrecked this stuff. And so Xerxes was like, that's enough of that. We're going to whip it. And so he had some guys fashion whips and then whip a body of water to, I guess, make his point. And as the story goes, I mean, I guess he eventually got across there. So I guess superstitiously you could say that it worked, but there was no immediate thing that occurred here. So if anybody had that story in mind and then they hear this story, it's one of those things where it's like, well, if that tree gets cut down in like 80 years or something, you could be like, see, I told you. Jesus cursed that thing and it totally came true eventually. But that isn't what happened. According to this story, which I think is one of the most curious, superstitious sounding stories in the whole Gospel of Matthew, in this account, it just withers right away. It breaks. It's like the opposite of the guy's hand that unwithered, that Jesus put vitality back into with merely a word. Here he takes vitality out of a living thing with merely a word. It does seem a little bit petulant on the surface, I suppose, to get so mad that you didn't get a fig. And I guess if he offered no further explanation or there were no context, this would feel more like one of those ancient Near Eastern legends about this or that hero of yore who did this or that thing. But there is a lesson and there is a point attached to it. And I also imagine that this type of action, this type of story, must have resonated more with the first century ancient Near Eastern mind than it probably does for you and me. He curses the tree, he says, never bear fruit again. Immediately the tree withers. And then the disciples ask what I think is a curious and interesting question. When the disciples saw this, they were amazed. Again? Just their reaction before we even get to the question is kind of quirky. I mean, they're just coming from Bethany. They watched Jesus, as we discussed yesterday, bring a person who'd already been treated for the grave and had been dead for a while back from the grave with a word. I mean, they remember when he walked on a choppy sea and when he cast out demons and when he fed 5,000 men plus women and children. Then like a couple of weeks later, 4,000 men plus women and children. He healed people from a distance. He made matter appear out of non-matter. I mean, they've seen a lot at this point, but still they're amazed. I guess you got to give them credit. Like, that's pretty cool, right? They see this stuff all the time, and instead of being, yeah, no big deal, I don't care, they still think it's cool. One time, I took a bunch of friends on a road trip to Alaska. We drove all the way from Nebraska to Alaska. That rhymes. And we got to this one little stretch of road, like out in the fjords. It was an amazing place. And there were just bears everywhere, all the time, constantly bears. And we saw the first one. I'm like, hey, bear! And everybody charges to the window, almost flip over the vehicle and gawking and pictures and everything. And everybody's all excited. And then about a mile later, I'm like, another bear! And the vehicle didn't almost tip over this time, but everybody's still really excited. And then about half a mile later, I was like, another bear! Oh, and there's another one right next to him. People were like, oh, that's really great. Thank you for continuing to tell us about how there are bears. That's really cool. Guys, another one! Okay, like, I'm on a call now, though, so you don't need to tell me about every bear. There's another bear! And we saw like 14 bears, but I was the only one who looked at all of them because everybody else was bored. And they're like, I get it. I've seen enough bears. I'm not faulting my friends for that. I'm just saying that's how human nature is. The only reason I kept seeing the bears is because I was driving and I didn't want to hit any bears. So I'm no better than my friends. All of that to say, though, let's give credit where it's due here to the disciples for still thinking that breaking the laws of time and space is cool, even though they've seen it a whole bunch of times. Their question, though, I mean, it's pretty simple. How did the fig tree wither so quickly? How did all the other stuff happen, guys? It just Kind of seems like all of nature is just bent to the will of Jesus, and like his control over nature is something that he uses to demonstrate that he really, really, really means it when he holds himself out as being the king of everything and the maker and sustainer of all things and all of that business. Oh my goodness. Seriously, we did not get nearly as far as I wanted to on this conversation. I wanted to get into the whole thing that Jesus said after that. Well, guess what, my friends? We got all the time in the world. So I'm going to hit pause there. But next time around, we got to talk about what Jesus said to them, the possible limits of if you just believe these things will happen. How far does that actually go? Because I believe some stuff really, 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 really hard, and it did not happen. What does he mean by this? Are there any qualifiers on it? How does it fit into the larger context of what's going on here? And what images from the Old Testament might this little exchange have conjured for the original audience? Miles to go before we sleep, my friends. I'm having a lot of fun with this thing, and I have some pretty fun ideas cooking for things I want to do for the patrons as we get toward the end of Matthew in order to celebrate this accomplishment. Stay tuned for that, I guess, as well. All right, this is fun. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.